Welcome everybody, I'm Jeremy John, and I want to take you into the fascinating world of tour guiding. Every day in London, you'll find eccentric personalities guiding people in the footsteps of history. Some show historic architecture to overseas visitors, while others bring history to life for school groups. All the best tour guides have one thing in common. They know how to tell a good story. And that's why I started this podcast, to capture the stories of these tour guides. You will find out what drew them to this profession. You will discover which sites they love the most. And you will hear the secret methods they use to make history come alive. Today I have two guides on the show. I have Fiona Johnston.
Hello, Jeremy.
And I have Alex Gordon.
Hello.
Now, I'm very excited about interviewing these two lovely tour guides. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, we must first find out a bit more about Fiona and Alex. So, Fiona, I'd like to start by asking you, which tours do you give in London?
Oh, well, we offer many. We do film and TV, we do music, and we do icon tours. So, predominantly Downton Abbey, Doctor Who, Sherlock Holmes, and, of course, Harry Potter.
Lovely. When you say we...
We is the company Brit Movie Tours, but we've also got our sister companies Brit Icon Tours and Brit Music Tours.
Splendid. Now, Alex, tell me, what tours do you currently give?
Well, I do a mix of the more general tours like Royal Highlights, Changing the Garden, all that, and then I do some more niche stuff that I'm particularly interested in, like Second World War, British Museum, National Gallery, and I'm developing a Shakespeare tour as well.
It's a pleasure to have you both on the show, and I would really like to know more about how you ended up as tour guides. And as regular listeners will know, every single person seems to have a different story as to how they ended up as a tour guide. Let's start with you, Fiona. Fiona, how many years ago did you become a tour guide, and how did you end up doing this job?
So I became a tour guide in the summer of 2018. I originally trained as an actor down in Rose Bruford Drama School in Sidcup. And after I graduated, I luckily got a job working as a scare actor at the London Dungeons.
What is a scare actor?
I was one of those people that jumped out and scared you and said, "Oh, hello there, love," with my fake rotting teeth makeup, and I got to play the Plague Doctor and Mrs. Lovett. Then I transferred to the company's sister attraction, Madame Two Swords, when they had the Sherlock Holmes attraction down in the basement, which is long gone now since the pandemic, but I got to play Mrs. Hudson, the mortician, and I love Sherlock Holmes, classic Victorian style. I did that for about 2 years and I realised I've had my time here. I've done the best that I can. What's going to be next? And I once had this drama teacher who said, if you are interested, you are interesting.
What did she mean by that?
She meant if you are passionate about what you can talk about, then do it, because it's that clear enthusiasm that shines through. If someone took me to the pub and say, "Oh, Fiona, talk to me about the Titanic," well, brace yourself, because I'll go off on a tangent. It's very clear as a tour guide that if you're passionate about something, that shines through. So when I was looking for my new niche thing back in 2018, I asked myself, well, what am I interested in? And I love the history of the Titanic, as well as Doctor Who and Sherlock Holmes, for example. So I typed into Google, Doctor Who London jobs, knowing at the time that the Cardiff experience had closed down, and I thought, is there anything in London? And lo and behold, there was Brit Movie Tours. And thankfully they were hiring, and here I am.
Wonderful, wonderful. Fiona has talked of her acting background, and, well, Alex, I believe your journey in also links with acting. Am I right there?
Speak to any tour guide on the street, and I'm going to take a wild stab and say maybe 1 in 4 or 5 maybe are actors or used to be performers or are comedians, or they've had that background of performing in front of audiences. Anyway, how I got into it was I studied theatre at university. I was always obsessed with theatre. I went to drama school afterwards to actually train as an actor. And then I started, well, for me, it was living the dream because I was off on tour around the world, literally with different touring companies in somewhat less than dreamy conditions sometimes, like driving around Germany or France or the UK or even Japan or China in like a pokey little van with 3 or 4 other actors with all our set and costumes and luggage, like traveling around.
You must have got to know each other really well.
Oh, yeah.
What were these performances that you were doing in China and Japan? Not out the van, obviously. That was to just transport everything.
Yes, yeah, the van was just for the transport. It wasn't like a kind of wagon play where we just got on top of the van and started performing in the town square. We were touring A Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare, which is a fantastic comedy. There were only 4 of us, so we all played like 3 characters each, multi-rolling like mad, swapping costumes. One of my colleagues had a 5-second costume change where she left the stage as one character and had to enter immediately as another. So it was very farcical, a lot of fun. And we were doing plays for children as well, sort of like fairy tales and plays that maybe had a message for teenagers that was often about bullying or something like that. And then I came to the end of that tour, got back home to the UK. This was a similar time you got into guiding, actually. This was like summer 2018. And I was looking for a job something I could turn to that could fill the gaps in between my acting work. And I loved history. I loved talking to people, meeting people. So the way I actually got into guiding was, I have to concede, it was something my mum did that helped me out, because she was in Marks and Spencer one day in the ladies' clothing section, and she takes some stuff to the fitting rooms and she overhears someone on the phone in one of the other cubicles. She's on the phone, this lady, and is saying, I've just started this tour company and I'm getting loads of bookings, but I can't do it all by myself. I really need someone to help me. And my mum, being my mum, just knocked on the door and spoke to this lady. Her name was Caroline, and said, oh, my son is an actor and he loves history. I think he would be the perfect person to help you out. And this lady, Caroline Mongan, who I want to give a bit of a shout out to, because she ended up being my kind of guiding mentor, as it were, invited both of us to just come on one of her tours. It was a full day tour of London, like a 5-hour long walking tour, which is pretty long and epic, but it kind of whizzed by because she just had put it together so well. You got all the highlights of London, plus some of Borough Market and the South Bank, the Globe, Shakespeare's Globe, and a few other places.
And a loo break, surely.
No loo breaks.
5 hours, no loo break?
No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Of course. Loo breaks, lunch break, snack break. It was a whole kind of experience. So I was like, oh, wait. A lot of this I already know from general history that I've just been interested in, but also I thought, no, I can do this. Tour guiding is basically acting, except your stage is the street in a way. That made me think, oh, wait, why did I never think about doing this before? For me, it was the perfect thing to find. And that was about 6.5 years ago now. And then I did the Westminster guiding course. There are various courses you can do in London in guiding. It's not a requisite, obviously. Jeremy, I know you're a City of London guide yourself, but I never intended it to kind of go that way, but it did, and I love it.
Can you tell me about that first tour you ever gave? Because you're saying, oh, this seems perfect. I love history and I've got an acting background and my mother's overheard someone on the phone in a changing cubicle. It all seems rather neat and nifty and sweet and serendipitous. Do you remember that first tour?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, we kind of split the tour because it was such a long tour. It was called London in a Day. So it was literally doing all the highlights of London in a day. And to begin with, we'd kind of alternate stops. And I remember when I gave my first stop, as it were, it was at Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square, like right in the heart of London. And I'm a big Nelson fan in terms of I find him fascinating as a historical figure. Absolutely wild life and stuff he did, but I was all prepared because Caroline had given me her notes. It was almost like a script. So as actors, as you know, Fiona, we learn a script, and I think tour guiding is a lot like that, except it's a bit more freeballing and improvised. So I'd learnt my stuff, but I was actually really nervous. My hands were starting to shake and I was like, what on earth's going on? I've performed in front of people loads and loads of times, but I think it was because it was a new context I wasn't very familiar with. That was like, I have to say stuff now. And then as soon as I got into the flow of it and started telling them about Nelson and why there's this great big column here and the Battle of Trafalgar, I don't know if you felt this before, where when you start, you're like, a bit nervous, and then you find your flow when you're actually get into it. And I found my flow. I was like, oh wait, this isn't so scary. This is just like acting. And if anything, it's easier because I don't have to be completely exact. I don't have to remember the lines word for word. In fact, if I did that, that would be boring. It's more interesting if it feels more spontaneous and I think conversational when you're guiding. And yeah, that was it really.
Fiona, do you remember your first tour?
Oh, yes, I do. It was on the 1st of July, 2018, and it was a private Paddington Bear walking tour.
Wow.
Yes, I'll admit the first time I was late because I got my timings mixed up because the public morning tours start at 10:30, but this one was a 10 a.m. start and I was late the first half an hour. So I turned up thinking nothing was wrong and my boss was saying, "Are you on your way?" And it was a lovely family of 3. It was a mother and her 2 sons. And I was a bit skeptical because having just thrown away 5 years with the company Merlin Entertainments to then take a risk for this self-employed job on an ad hoc basis. And these 2 children were absolutely delightful. And I remembered my information like it was a script. But one of the children would not stop interrupting me. And the voice in the back of my head said, "Oh, please don't tell me I have just sacrificed a comfortable job for this risk. And this is going to be it every single time." No, the child was just very, very energetic. And that was my first tour. And then bit by bit, my boss said, "Are you a fan of this? Are you interested in this?" For example, Doctor Who, Harry Potter, Sherlock Holmes, and eventually Downton Abbey, primarily London-based stuff. So Paddington was my first ever tour. And I still love it to this day.
Both Alex and Fiona give tours of different figures from London's history. Now, some of these figures were real people. For example, Shakespeare existed. Apart from those conspiracies, William Shakespeare was real. And we're going to talk about him with Alex, and then we're going to move on to talk about Doctor Who and Sherlock Holmes with Fiona. But let's start with Shakespeare. Alex, you're in the process of creating a Shakespeare tour, and you're also someone that's worked for how many years at the Shakespeare Globe?
Well, I'm actually new this season, in fact. So Shakespeare's Globe, bit of context, it's a theatre that is on London's South Bank, so south of the river, but still in central London. And it is a replica of the original playhouse, the Globe Theatre, that Shakespeare co-owned and ran and had his plays performed at 400-ish years ago. Just a bit about what I do at the Globe. I'm what they call an education ambassador, which means I work a lot with young people, with school groups, education groups who come to the theatre and they're going there to see a show. And so we're effectively kind of their chaperones, their ushers, they're almost like their guides, if you will. And our job is basically to welcome to the theatre and make sure they have a good stay, a safe stay and all that. And also inform them about the theatre and about the way the plays are performed and about also how to behave in the theatre, etc., etc. So what I want to do with this walking tour I'm developing, which is about Shakespeare's London, is to try and take people back to that time. And in a way, I guess tour guides are a bit like Doctor Who in that we're, if I may pursue this metaphor, we are kind of like time travellers, but we're doing it. It is a bit like magic if it's done really well, I think. The best guides I've seen, they're almost like magicians where they walk you down a street and point things out to you, but then the things they point out begin to kind of reveal a world that was. And there are still lots of little remnants of Shakespeare's London. He lived in London, but he kind of had a double life because he had a big country house back home in Stratford-upon-Avon in the Midlands, Warwickshire, where he was born. It's sort of near Birmingham. And basically, we don't know a lot about Shakespeare at all as a person, which is super fascinating because so much from that period is just undocumented. All we know concretely about him is that he existed. His name was William Shakespeare. He wrote about 37 plays, and there's some other things like a few letters and wills. But there's almost nothing about his life story, just sort of clues that pop up. Like we know he was an actor, before he was a famous writer, because he appears in playbills from the time. And he made his name more as a poet before he made his name as a playwright. Anyway, we know very little about him, actually, as a person. So what I want to do with these tours is to be honest about that and say, okay, we don't actually know that much about him, but this was his London, and what his London was like was nothing like it is today. Or maybe in some ways it kind of is, because it was very dirty. It was very chaotic. It was the place where people went to make their fortunes from all over the country and the world. It was still, even for the late 1500s, a very cosmopolitan city. It had people from Europe, from the Mediterranean, from North Africa even, and all these characters that pop up in his plays. So he was just this explosive kind of creative force, just writing practically non-stop. And how he did that, I find the idea of genius very fascinating. And these figures, even fictional figures of genius like Doctor Who, for instance, or Sherlock, who are just like firing on all cylinders all the time. And I just like to, I guess it's a combination of history with a bit of dramatic license to kind of try and take people on this story of what might Shakespeare have been doing and what was happening in London at the time. How did that influence his plays, and where are the places in London that still relate to it? Because there are still little markers all around.
There was a book that came out a year ago, and I think it's called, I may be misquoting, I think it's called Shakespeare is Hard, but So is Life.
Yes, that is. Yes, that's right.
And I do think that there's something about touring and what you, I'm sure, are going to achieve, which is to make it a bit less difficult. And then people after the tour can do the difficult stuff as a sort of sweetener, the sugar to the pill of Shakespeare.
Well, that would be my hope. If just from this tour, if people then decide, let's go see a show at the Globe for a £5 standing ticket, which is the cheapest theatre ticket in London, then I would be very happy with that, because we think Shakespeare has this reputation the world over, I think, as being difficult and hard to understand and kind of scary and also maybe irrelevant. But it isn't if you actually hear it and see it. And so I weave some bits of Shakespeare into my tour as well. And when you start speaking it, to begin with, people are a bit like, what's he saying? What's going on? But then, because the language has this kind of rhythm and sound to it, it actually has if it's done well, then it can actually, I think, cast a spell. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention. What on earth does that mean? It's the first line of Henry V, and it's difficult for us to understand. But if you go with it, it takes you on a journey, on a story.
Lovely. Well, I want to know then, can you cast a spell, Fiona, with Doctor Who and with Sherlock Holmes? We're going to talk about these fictitious characters from London history. So let's start with Sherlock Holmes.
So to put it into perspective for international listeners, for example, Sherlock Holmes is the most portrayed fictional character in film, television and stage history.
Wow.
Absolute. Some legends have played him on stage. I mean, the late, great Alan Rickman played Sherlock Holmes. And of course, Robert Downey Jr., Jeremy Brett, who's my favourite Sherlock Holmes, and of course, the ever wonderful cheekboned Benedict Cumberbatch. So whenever I do the Sherlock Holmes tours, I always find out who the die-hard fans are. So we start in Piccadilly Circus, which geographically speaking is very much in the centre of London, right on the cusp of Theatreland, Shaftesbury Avenue, Chinatown. So it's a great connection. And within Piccadilly Circus is a gorgeous restaurant called the Criterion. It's been around since the 1800s, but of course times change. As of this recording, it's now a fantastic Indian restaurant. But according to English literature, and according to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, we first hear the name Sherlock Holmes within this restaurant in the very, very first book that's written, A Study in Scarlet, set on New Year's Day in 1881. And Dr. John Watson's looking for a place to live. He reunites with his dear friend Stamford, and we first hear the name Sherlock Holmes. But when I'm meeting with my customers and I find out who's the big fan, and who's been dragged here against their will by a loved one with the promise of shopping in the pub afterwards? Raise your hands now. I do it in chronological order, starting who's read the books, if not some, then all of them, good flourish of hands. All right. Who's a fan of the black and white films with Basil Rathbone, for example? All right. Who's a fan of the lesser known TV series with Jeremy Brett? And who here is a fan of the Guy Ritchie films? All right. You know, shower of hands. And I always leave this joke for last. I say, right. Now, who's here because of Benedict Cumberbatch? And they all lift up their hands. I go, right, okay. But the joyful thing about the tour is that it addresses everything from the books to the present day, and even the other adaptations like Enola Holmes and Mr. Holmes starring Sir Ian McKellen, all the lesser known stuff. And it goes back to the history of the theatrical plays as well, how certain aspects came about, where did this come from, how do we picture Sherlock Holmes and why? And people go, oh my God, I never thought about that. So actually, we do owe a fair bit down to an American actor, a man called William Gillette, actually, who got to play Sherlock Holmes on the stage in 1901, and he made certain decisions about his portrayal that has really impacted how we picture Sherlock Holmes today. For example, the deerstalker hat, or even the calabash pipe, or the famous phrase, "Elementary, my dear Watson." William Gillette was a big name at that time. He'd done a lot of plays in London, of course, in America, and he was in communication with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle at the time. And a little back history for you. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who trained as a medical practitioner, created Sherlock Holmes and then killed him off because he'd had enough. He thought, right, I've had my money, I've had my fame, let's kill him off. So at this point in 1901, he hasn't got the enthusiasm for the detective anymore. And William asked him, what can I do or not do with my performance? And Sir Arthur said, you may marry him or murder him. You can do what you want. He didn't really care. This opened up a lot of prospects. And so William Gillette famously played him. And then, little backstory, bit of a history for you there. This always takes the customers by surprise. As we've established, people train as an actor, you've got to start from somewhere. Even the biggest names we have today, they have started with little voiceover commercials and tiny adverts, and now they're in Marvel, DC, Disney. And in this small production of Sherlock Holmes, when it was on at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, I believe, you can find a copy of the programme, and there's the name William Gillette playing Sherlock Holmes. All right. Then you trace it down, and then you find this name. Hang on a second. So who's playing Billy the Page Boy? Charlie Chaplin. So that was his big breakthrough in the West End theatre. And then 10 years later, he's going off to America to make his name. And then another 10 years, he's back as one of the greatest entertainers. And he had to start from somewhere. And he started in Sherlock Holmes as a Billy the Page Boy. But the tour addresses everything from the classic to the modern day, and then I go to cross Waterloo Bridge and I say, right, you see that embankment over there? That's where the dead body of the security guard is found in Series 1, Episode 3 of BBC Sherlock. And even the show pays tribute to the classic books in ways you might not recognise.
I was going to ask, do you get some guests on your tours who are such big fans that they almost know it episode by episode better than you? Sometimes? Or?
Sometimes, yes. They will ask really, really good questions saying, is it true about this or what about this? And I'll say, there are 60 books in total and I have read them all, but I cannot remember off the top of my head what happened in every single one.
Can't remember what happened on page 58 of Hound of the Baskervilles?
No, not at all, no. But people will ask some great questions, and I mean, they'll ask the typical, who's your favourite Sherlock Holmes? What's your favourite story and why? Little bits, or some of my favourites. Do you think they'll make another series of the BBC show? And I say, I think it's had its time.
On your tours, I'm really curious about the locations, because when I think of what Alex is doing, he's got a few big hitters, well, especially the Globe itself. You know, to stand in front of the Globe, it's one of the top 10 photographed buildings. Probably there's some statistic. Don't write to me and tell me that it's the 11th if you're listening. But, it's a photographable, photogenic building. And you've got some picturesque settings there. I'm curious, Fiona, about this tour of yours, because especially for those that aren't necessarily big Sherlock fans, you know, the husband or the wife or the kids that came on that weren't the actual fans. What are the buildings? What are the streets? What are the locations that, even if you're not a Sherlock Holmes aficionado, still get those people going, wow, that's pretty cool?
Well, You've got the bigger iconic landmarks like Trafalgar Square, Buckingham Palace, and the view of the River Thames, made famous by the opening credits of the BBC show. But then you've got the lesser known locations where people say, I had no idea that was filmed here, or I had no idea this was set here. So a good example, off the top of my head, one of my favourites seems to be the Sherlock Holmes pub, which is on Northumberland Avenue, so right down the road from Trafalgar Square. And you walk past it, and I joke to the customers, come on, let's go to the pub. Hey, it's not open. Oh. But it's still fun when we get there, because I say, oh, I wonder why we've stopped over here. And they think, oh, maybe it's just because someone's a fan of Sherlock Holmes. And I say, oh, no, there's a connection. So 100 odd years ago, the pub was actually a hotel, specifically the Northumberland Arms Hotel, which was featured in The Hound of the Baskervilles. And people go, hang on, but I have to be careful, because if you haven't read the books or if they're just a fan of the BBC show, I say, I'll try not to ruin it for you too much in case you read it afterwards. But to set the tone, there's a supposed hound from hell. Sherlock Holmes investigates, and a character stays in this hotel before they travel back to Dartmoor to continue with the case. And something very strange happens. And of course, over time, the hotel runs down, it got turned into a pub, but during the 1950s, Conan Doyle's family created a life-size replica of the study at 221B Baker Street. And they put lots of Easter egg references to all the stories that Conan Doyle had written, like the jackknife in the mantelpiece and the Persian slipper with the pipe tobacco near the fireplace. And they gave this study to the Festival of Britain, which then held up in London, it went around the country and then around the world for about 6 or 7 years until everything needed a place to go. So this was around 1958 when the festivals come to an end, and simultaneously the hotel is being turned into a pub. And they put their hands up and said, well, we were formerly the hotel where Henry Baskerville stayed. We will take the study off of your hands and give it a proper home. And it's still there to this day. People don't know it. They have to go up to the first floor restaurant, and it's behind some lovely glass panes, so you can't touch anything. But it's a lovely replica, and you think, oh, it's lovely and warm and cozy, and you can hear the fireplace crackling in the back. But it's a fantastic pub, and they really lean into their Sherlock Holmes heritage, and they do a fabulous Sunday roast as well.
Do people often, I mean, where does the tour end? Do you tell people to head there after?
Yes, I usually tell people to circle back. So we finish inside Somerset House, which is just off the Strand, right by the River Thames, which was featured in 2 Sherlock Holmes films. Because you've also got to remember there are several adaptations that people don't know about. One of which is called The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. That was filmed in Somerset House. We finish there, and then afterwards I say, right, it's nearly 1 o'clock, it's lunchtime. If you want to continue the Sherlock Holmes adventure, here's where you can go. So we've got escape rooms, we've got restaurants, you can go back to the pub, just head out, take a right, and then straight back down the Strand. You'll be there in less than 10 minutes. But since we've made it through a global pandemic, I always say, if you're big on the BBC show, good news, Speedy's Cafe actually exists. And it's still based on North Gower Street, or Faker Street, as we call it, Fake Baker Street. And they're still proud of their Sherlock Holmes heritage as well, because they've got framed photos in the cafe of Una Stubbs, Benedict Cumberbatch, Martin Freeman and Mark Gatiss from when they were filming. And you walk in, they're lovely, lovely guys, but they were so close to selling during the pandemic, and the Sherlock fans were somewhat up in arms. They're still going. And I say, we got to celebrate this. So here are the directions. You can go to Madame Tussauds. You can go to the museum on Baker Street, for example. Any more questions, I'll hang around for a few more minutes.
I'm imagining the Doctor Who tours you do have a lot in common with the Sherlock Holmes in terms of fictitious character, lots of remakes and remixes of Doctor Who, and therefore lots of locations. Would I be correct there?
Very much so, yeah. Doctor Who is the longest running science fiction show in television history. It's older than Star Trek and it's older than Star Wars. Started in November 1963 just as a little tea time treat for kids to learn about history and science, and it just started out as a tiny little thing, but thankfully, through hardships of the 1960s, they made it through. It has been going now for just over 60 years, and people still flock to visit the London locations because, as it has been said, For someone who has a machine that can go through all of time and space, the Doctor has a thing for modern day London.
Yes.
Which is great for us tour guides. Yeah, people flock because they absolutely love it. And they've got their favourite, much like Sherlock Holmes, they've got their favourite incarnations of the Time Lord or of the detective. Like people love Benedict Cumberbatch. With Doctor Who, they love Matt Smith, Tom Baker, David Tennant.
Where does that tour go?
So we start at the Shard, fantastic skyscraper down by London Bridge. We journey through the likes of Southwark Cathedral, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, towards St Paul's, made famous by the Cybermen in 1968, and then we take a traditional London double-decker bus and make our way towards Trafalgar Square, and we finish down by the River Thames opposite this ginormous metal wheel that was featured back in 2005. The London Eye, folks.
Well, it just remains for me now to thank my guests. It's been a delight to sit down with you and flesh out various aspects of your tours and get to know you both a bit better. Can I say a big thanks to Fiona Johnston?
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
And a big thanks too to Alex Gordon.
Thanks, Jeremy.
And of course, a thanks to you, the listener, for tuning in and making it to the end of the episode. Please, if you've enjoyed this podcast, click like or 5 stars, depending which app you're listening on. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I mean, you have, haven't you? But if you haven't, then please subscribe or click follow. There's various different buttons. Until the next show, cheerio.